Dream of DOGMAN.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
We've got 2 new stories, including a New York City cryptid tale. But first, I Dream of DOGMAN, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. Sometimes a dream can seem real, because maybe it is. Before I even begin, I want to point out that although this narrative starts out talking about weird dreams I had, the main story is about the stuff that happened to me in real life after the dreams. So be patient, because it won't make any sense unless I describe the dreams first. When I was a teenager, my family would drive south each winter to visit relatives. In my parents' minds, we were avoiding the cold weather in New York City, but actually Tennessee gets just about as cold as New York, so I don't think they thought it through very clearly. My 2 female cousins would take me hiking, which was really just wandering around the cedars of Lebanon State Park, trying to avoid our respective parents. Independence is so important to you when you're a teenager that you're willing to freeze your butt off all day just to get a little of it. My brother mostly stayed back in the house watching our cousin's VHS video collection. I think this was around the time DVDs had just come out, but the people we knew were still mostly watching VHS tapes. That year, my brother was on a werewolf kick, and it seemed like every time I was in the house, he was watching something like Wolfen or The Howling or one of those kinds of horror movies. Then one night, I had this weird dream. In the dream, I was out in the forest, but I wasn't hiking. I was alone and off trail. I felt at home in the bushes and moved through them with ease and grace. I felt super powerful and strong, like I could do anything I put my mind to, even impossible things. I came out of the brush into a clearing. I knew exactly where I was. It was the intersection of Cedar Forest Road and Sioux Warren Trail. I was just off the road looking down the trail in the direction of Hurricane Creek. Just then, I saw a very familiar car driving up. It was my parents' car. I saw my mother driving and my father in the passenger seat. Studying the scene a little more closely, I could swear I saw my 2 female cousins sitting in the back, along with me. I stepped all the way out of the brush to get a better look at the car, which was now idling by the stop sign. Everyone in the car made eye contact with me, and then they all screamed in horror. That's when I woke up, my heart beating fast like I had been running a marathon. It was the most real-seeming dream I had ever lived through. When I went down to breakfast and my brother was watching yet another werewolf picture on TV, I realized he had probably inspired my nightmare. I asked him if he had any comedies on that VHS pile he could put on, and he said he was running Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein next. That one's got Lon Chaney Jr. in it as the Wolfman, he told me excitedly. Fine. That meant another day of hiking for me. I think I had that dream 2 more times. It was getting so I had a hard time falling asleep at night because I didn't want to deal with the dream. I was in the forest in the snow. I see my family in the car and they are all terrified of me. Why are they afraid of me? And how can I be me but also in the car? One night the dream started and I saw my family's car pull up. Instead of revealing myself this time, I hid in the bushes and watched. When they drove by, I followed them. I knew I could run as fast as I wanted to. I had outrun deer while hunting in previous dreams. I was an apex predator. When we all arrived at my cousin's house, I hid behind a tree, watching them go inside. I stayed up until night observing them, observing myself, eating dinner, then watching TV, then going to bed. After I saw myself in bed, I wandered closer to the house. It was a bright moon out, but no other illumination. As I got to my bedroom window and saw myself sleeping there, I noticed I could also see my own moonlit reflection in the window. But I didn't look like me. I looked like one of the werewolves from my brother's movies. Again, I woke with a start, my head beating like a machine gun. This time I got up quickly and pulled my window shades down. In the dream, I had just looked through that window and seen myself. I didn't want to look out. I didn't want to see what was outside. I didn't want to know. Maybe it was just a dream, but I just didn't want to find out. That morning at breakfast, I started asking my parents when we were going home, and my uncle got kind of insulted. That led to this whole thing, and so my cousins and I split for the forest without even finishing our breakfasts. We got some food at a diner on the way to the state park, and then went back again for lunch to warm up. We had no plans, nothing to do, but we wanted to avoid drama and conflict, so we planned on staying out all day. That evening, we were starting to wander through the park back toward home when we saw my parents' car pulling up. We figured we were going to get lectured, but instead they were apologetic about the conflict earlier in the day and said they'd been driving around looking for us for hours. They offered to take us to the movies, so we hopped in and we drove off. That's when I got the strangest feeling of déjà vu. I looked outside and realized we were driving over Hurricane Creek. That meant we were on Sioux Warren Trail, heading toward... There it was, the stop sign. That meant this was the moment from my dream. I looked across the road and I saw it before everyone else. I saw a dog's head glaring back at me from the bushes. I screamed at the top of my lungs and pointed. Everyone else now looked also as a giant dog walked out of the bushes on her hind legs and stood there staring at us intently. She was definitely female. She had teats like a mother dog, but she had to have been 7 feet tall. Her hair was dark and her eyes were orange-yellow. She didn't seem like a natural creature. She seemed like a demon covered in fur. But when she looked at me, she looked so confused and sad. I knew why. "Drive," I shouted. Then I shouted it again and again and again. To get past the creature, my mother would have to drive closer to it, then turn past it. There was no other way. It was either that or drive backwards down the trail for miles. So my mom hit the gas and we accelerated toward the creature, toward my nightmare. I don't know what happened next because I fainted flat away. We left the next morning. My parents and I were pretty shaken up and the mood in the house had changed. My uncle thought we were making up the Dogman story as an excuse, so there was even more unnecessary drama. It was just time to go. In all the years since then, I've never had a dream anything like that ever again. I have no explanation for what it was that happened. I dreamed that I was the entity that frightened myself. And no matter how confused or sad I was in my dreams, I was still terrified of the female werewolf when I saw her at the crossroads. I would like to say that the dream taught me not to fear and taught me to treat even frightening entities as I would want them to treat me. And yet, I think the lesson I took away from it was more like, even evil creatures have feelings. But it's not a kind of awareness that makes you feel better about life or that causes you to change your behavior. Just because I vividly experienced what it feels like to be a monstrous beast while in my dreams didn't make the beast any less monstrous when I encountered her again in my waking state. We still have to battle the evils in our lives, but now I do so sadly, understanding on a deep level that even those who mean to do me harm or destroy me are real people with the same exact feelings that I have. If you get threatened by a dogman, don't sympathize with him or her because of what I've told you. Yes, I know that they are conscious, thinking people just like us, but they are still evil and they won't hesitate to take you out in a second if you give them a chance. Empathize with them, respect them, avoid them if you can. But if you have to defend yourself, do it unquestioningly. Do it before they do something to you. Don't go away. We've got an all-new tale about a largely, previously undocumented mammalian cryptid from New York City. The Rat Man. As told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. I've been living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan since the 1970s, when I was in my early 20s. It was, back then, a neighborhood of lovely, large apartments built for doctors and lawyers which had fallen on hard times. The buildings, which were by then cheap to live in, had fallen into disrepair. Crime was rampant. Garbage blew down the streets and rats roamed openly. Giant men dressed as ladies ran into traffic, working their illegal trade right on Broadway in front of McDonald's. I got a room a block away from Broadway in a formerly grand apartment which had been altered into many smaller rooms through the use of cheap plaster walls. Over the years, people moved out and I got better work. I took over more of the rent and more of the space. Eventually, by the late 1980s, one of my roommates transferred the lease into my name, which was easier to do back then than now. And the apartment has been entirely mine since then. I removed most of the new walls and restored some of the former glory of the place. By the 1990s, the neighborhood was hip and expensive again. Seinfeld set his sitcom there. Thanks to rent control, the amount I paid each month had stayed roughly at the 1980s rate, right up through the 21st century. When new neighbors moving in upstairs a few years ago told me what they were paying, I was shocked. There was no way I could afford to pay that much. I realized how lucky I was to have that place. I was right on the ground floor with a window onto a relatively quiet side street. Even inside, I always felt like I was part of the neighborhood because I got used to who would walk by and when they would do it. If I was watching TV or reading by the window at night, I'd be frequently interrupted by the hellos of neighbors. I retired from my career, and I expected to settle into my golden years relaxing and looking out the window onto my beloved neighborhood. Then my friendly, sweet landlord died. The building was taken over by a company that the New York Daily News described as New York's new evil mega landlord. They set up a table in our lobby and made us line up to be interrogated about why we wanted to live in the building. Then they fingerprinted and photographed us like criminals. We were issued photo ID cards that we had to use in conjunction with a new box they had installed on our front door. Now they would have information about when we went out or stayed home along with security video. Why did they need this? They installed alarms on doors that didn't need them, and the alarms would go off all times of the day and night. None of the tenants had keys to turn the incredibly loud sirens off, and the management company had moved our superintendent to a different building. We would have to call management and beg them to come turn the alarms off, which would take hours every time. Then one snowy morning, I got up and made coffee, ready to settle into my window seat and greet the neighbors. What I saw really shocked me. The snow was piled up outside the window so high I couldn't see out. Throwing on my overcoat and galoshes, I ran outside to see how much it had snowed during the night that it should cover my window. It turned out that the sidewalk had been shoveled, but for some reason, all the snow had been deliberately piled in front of my window. I went back inside to call the management office and noticed that the bottom of the wall on the side where they had piled the snow was all stained wet and leaking. The place smelled bad, like mildew, but also something terrible mixed in. I couldn't place it, but it was an awful smell. When I finally got through to one of the building managers, he told me it probably smelled bad because of all the dead rats rotting in our basement. This shocked me, but he wasn't done. He told me the building was dangerous for an old lady like me to live in, and that if he were me, he'd have already moved out. That was his answer to me. "It's even worse than you're saying, so move out." I hung up and sat there shaking my head for a while. So many years of peace in this place. I guess I lived a few years too long, I said to myself. Then the lights went out and the TV turned off. It was a bright morning and I could still see clearly in the light that came through my snow-covered window. I wondered if this was just my apartment or the entire building, or maybe a city-wide blackout. Our super usually visited in the morning. He might even have turned the power off for some reason himself. I resolved to go to the basement and see what I could see. There was a narrow, creepy staircase next to the elevator that led from the lobby down to the basement. When I got to the bottom, there was one of those alarmed doors blocking my way. I pushed on it anyway, and it opened easily and quietly. Maybe the lock and alarm worked electrically and opened because the electricity was off? I'm not sure. Maybe it was just left open. I went inside and immediately splashed ice-cold water up onto my legs. The entire basement was flooded with about an inch of water down to maybe a quarter of an inch in some shallower areas. I could see how unevenly the concrete floor had been put down, some parts deep below the water and some forming islands above the new sea level down there. I called out our super's name. I heard no response other than the echoing of my voice. Stepping gingerly, I took a few steps toward the laundry room. Kerplunk, kerplunk, kerplunk. I called out the super's name again, and this time I heard something moving in the water in the laundry room. Quickly, I jogged over to the laundry room door and peered inside. The flooding was everywhere, in this room as well, but the liquid had a thicker and darker quality to it. I stared for a while in the dim light until I realized it was a deep crimson red. Something splashed in the darkness and I forgot about the water. Looking up, I saw the dark silhouette of a man taller than myself, but he was the strangest shaped man I'd ever seen. My eyes were telling my brain what his silhouette looked like, and yet my brain was not making any sense out of it. Then suddenly the overhead lights came back on and one of the dryers began turning again. I squinted in shock as my eyes readjusted to the harsh fluorescent brightness. That was not a man standing in front of me. That was a monster. Although as large as a linebacker or a fireman, this was some sort of animal, covered in gray fur. My first impression had been that it was standing on its hind legs, but now in the light I could see that it was squatting on its hind legs. Its body was essentially that of a giant rat, reared up with its claws in front of it in a defensive or attack pose. It had a long nose like a dog, but its nose and whiskers twitched ridiculously and sickeningly. I could hear it breathing, trying to understand me by my scent, and I realized the source of the terrible smell. No, not the monster, but the thing on the floor in front of it, the formerly living thing laying there in that crimson pool. I don't even know what it had been in life, maybe a stray, maybe somebody's pet. I felt very ill and the room swayed. The giant, hideous abomination hissed at me in a threatening way, and I took a quick step backward. Kerplunk! It took advantage of my retreat to turn around and somehow throw itself through a crack in the bottom of the wall that was far too small for even me to fit through. let alone something of his size. Even though the monster was gone, I felt sick. I ran for the stairs to escape the basement, and I ran right into the super. I explained the entire thing to him in a panicked way, and he just acted like I was crazy. That was the last straw, and I gave up. If they wanted me to leave, I would leave. I moved in with my daughter and her husband in Queens. They don't like having me here, and I don't like being a burden on them. I sit in my new window in my new room, but it's on the second floor and overlooks a one-way dead end that very few people ever have reason to walk or drive down. But I'm grateful to be here, and I know I'm lucky. The suburbs don't have a lot of things that the city has. Most of that makes me sad. But suburban people don't have giant man-sized rats in their basements. And that part makes me glad.
Thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.